Please help me welcome our duo, Giuliano Morse, UX researcher at Meta, and Chuck Kwong, UX researcher at Microsoft.
All right.
All right, so our topic for this panel is UXR Evals. So you've heard of Evals. Now we have this UXR version of it. Can you just give us an introduction to what are these UXR Evals? Why are we doing them?
Yeah, and to give a fair warning, Chuck and I might do them differently. So we might get different answers based on which one of us are talking. But I will say, yeah, the UXR Evals is a methodology basically that allows UX research to play in a much more technical space where typically we haven't in the past. Meaning myself and Chuck are embedded in like post-training teams for foundational model development and steering. And what these things are, I mean, maybe it's best to start with the problem of how it was born. 2 years ago or so, we were doing these human evals to measure the model quality of one of the earlier models at Meta. And the human evals kept saying, your model's outperforming competitors. But that was clearly not true. We knew it from using the product. Leadership's intuition was saying something's not quite right. And so we kept tweaking the existing human evals, but we couldn't get it to say something that made sense. So at the time, we thought, what if we replace the human annotators with real users in their real context using the actual full end-to-end product, which is fundamentally different than the way traditional human evals are done, which is like consultants or domain experts as opposed to users. Usually not in the end product. Usually it's pulling models from an API on an A/B screen, in which case the API is bypassing a system prompt and tool calling, so you're not really getting the full actual end experience. And when we did this as a small experiment, we saw results that made a lot more sense. And from there, it's snowballed into a whole program.
Yeah, great answer. So the way we think about user evals at Microsoft AI is it's simply just bringing users into how we evaluate AI systems. If you've been sort of following the industry, evals have been a buzzword for the past year. Evals have kind of evolved from sort of an engineering perspective where engineers kind of look through AI-generated output, look through the responses, and kind of create these rubrics to find these specific failure cases. And with these defined rubrics, there's different ways to judge them. One of them is the human annotators. The other way is using AI to evaluate AI. But what's missing in this whole picture is the user context. When you have users evaluating AI, they bring in that situational context that is often missing in machine evals and the human expert annotations. And there's so much value in that user feedback. We need to systematically kind of incorporate that in how we evaluate AI systems. And I think UXR is like a great function to really bring in that insight with our expertise and kind of evolve how we sort of evaluate AI systems today.
So you're going to do some UXR evals. You're sitting down to do it. Tell us, like, kind of concretely, how do you approach it? Like, what is the process and what do you do?
Yeah, we started using AI user evals last summer at Microsoft AI. So I work on Consumer Copilot. At Microsoft, there's many different copilots. There's Enterprise Copilot, M365, all the different integrations across the M365 software. I personally work on Consumer Copilot. And so for user evals, we found that consumers use cases and the jobs that they bring to AI are super varied. Lots of different types of intents. It could be travel, it could be advice, it could be productivity use cases. And there wasn't really a structured way to kind of capture all that feedback. And so Chris Monnier, he's a colleague of mine at Microsoft AI. He was sort of the one who came out with this initial idea of how do we do like a side-by-side test of one model versus another. It was a super simple test. We only tested 5, 10 users. We used one of the AI moderated platforms. There's so many out there in the back. We personally use Outset for our initial test case. And that initial study provided such rich insight that the product team was missing. And over time, we basically scaled that process. So what you see here on the slides is sort of our workflow, the anatomy of a user eval. It really starts with a real user need. That user comes in with their own context and their task, and they try that user, they come in with that intent to try a specific model and interact with it. So it's an experiential evaluation. And then they repeat that process with a different model. And then they compare. And this is where that rich data comes from, is that comparative judgment. To have like two sort of models to compare to, the user really provides like a lot of rich feedback. And they also provide other types of data. You can ask Likert, you can include Likert questions or follow-ups. If you're using an AI moderator interview, you could do like a deep probing, and you collect all that data, and it provides like a really rich data set for you to kind of explore.
I'll add something else too, which is all the data that comes out of these evals. Not only can you use them obviously to give you really high quality signal of how your model is performing at specific use cases or overall, even relative to a competitor. So it's like a very high quality signal. But it also produces large amounts of very clean data that we then use to train reward models. We use it to train classifiers, LLM judges, even into certain production models and things like that. So the value as a UX researcher goes from providing insights that are high quality, which I think is a bread and butter thing for us. But what's a little bit different is it also produces data sets that engineering teams will consume in a very highly technical environment that actually steers the model in a specific manner. That has become almost as or more, whatever, but as valuable as the insights themselves.
Yeah, that was something I was curious about, is like your technical stakeholders. How do they feel about this sort of signal? Was it a hard sell? Were they eager for this? How did that land for them?
It was a hard sell until the very first experiment where I had the easiest stakeholder persuasion meeting of my life, which was, here's the eval you did, here's the eval I did. Which one do you think makes a little more sense? That led to a lot of buy-in. And developing the methodology with research scientists and the technical people themselves. There was so much that I learned on how to make the methodology highly rigorous and applicable for them by building it with them. And now it's in a lot of demand. It's really, really well received, and it's seen as in the menu of evals of the auto evals, the human expert evals, that user evals brings a very distinct value to the technical folks. So it's going quite well.
Yeah, from either of you, that was going to be my follow-up question. Like when you say you look at the evals done in one way and then you look at them done in this UXR way, what is missing? What is the gap, and how are the ones you're doing better, I guess, or offering a different value?
Yeah, I can kick it off, then I'll hand it. Okay, yeah, I mean, the key thing is, so there's so much complexity here, but when it comes to more subjective evals, basically human annotators and LLM judges struggle to accurately represent real user needs. So why? Well, LLM judges are really good at catching objective things in the conversational data sets, so like factuality. LLM judge, great for that. Latency, we'll say it's got to be under zero point 0.8 seconds, great. But is something funny? Okay, an LLM judge, they're getting better. They're getting really, really good at catching what humor is, but you actually need to objectify the subjectivity of humor. So maybe you have to say, like, it has ha-ha in the text, which is not actually funny, but that's the only way to get an LLM judge to be sensitive enough to capture a subjective thing like humor. And then human annotators are also great for more objective things, and they can be calibrated to subjective things, but that's a different talk. But generally speaking, they don't represent the real user needs. So, for something like overall preference, like they can tell you the response was factual, but was it really better than if I had used this other model? And did it actually solve my problem? Well, these human annotators, they're given instructions meant to pretend they're end users, and they simply struggle with the highly subjective components of quality. And so that's where user evals differentiates itself. If it's highly subjective and non-expert, like domain-specific, we don't want users giving feedback on maybe complex mathematics, then user evals provides a very distinct value.
Chuck, did you want to add?
Yeah, for sure. I think like different evals have different benefits. I wouldn't say like one eval is better than the other. It's more so that the existing set of evals that we do, it's really missing that user context. Like Giuliano said, LM judges are great for scale, consistency. We have human annotation where we have trained judges evaluating very specific types of output. Like you might have, coding generated response where you need judges who are well versed in programming, or you have writers who are judging literary responses or editing text responses. But where's the user? Where's the user context? Where's the user situation in all of this? One example that really struck me when I started doing these evals was like a specific study we did around shopping. A user came in, was asking for like designer shoes at a beach wedding. One of the models provided what looked like a really good response on the surface. It provided Jimmy Choo's shoes, Valentino shoes, very like fashionable designer shoes. And on the surface, it looked like a really well, complete, detailed response, links to reputable websites. But in the user feedback, they were like, wait, I can't be wearing stilettos at a beach wedding. I'll literally sink in the sand. That one minor insight really changed what good looked like, right? It was really missing that context behind the user, that situation. When you have LLM judges and human annotators, they don't bring in that stakes with them. They don't bring in that situation. And that's what UXR is good for, is uncovering what is the intent behind the intent, what is the situation behind the user, and bringing that to the forefront. And we think that user evals is a great sort of methodology to systemize that in the age of AI products.
What is the most surprising thing you've learned from doing this work?
I don't know. There's like a lot of different ways. I mean, one is that, I think I've kind of said these things, but I feel like one is UX research can play in a technical space. I was very surprised by that, in such a highly technical space, and add a lot of value. Another surprising thing was that in human annotation, sometimes we give annotators instructions on to pretend to be certain types of users. And I thought I was surprised to find that these are sort of scrappy ways to approximate user preferences, which I think as UX researchers, we know that that's not great. That's suboptimal. And so, yeah, I mean, the methodology itself is a hybrid of something engineers have been doing for almost a decade and bringing our expertise into it. Like, it's funny to think that engineering teams have been doing evals for years and years without us, without sociologists and psychologists and statisticians in more in the human sciences, because it's so up our alley. So I think that was a very pleasant surprise and an opportunity for us, I think. That's at a high level. There's also been more surprising real findings, like the stilettos in the sand, like dozens of those.
Yeah, it became a phrase, stilettos on the beach, yeah. Yeah, I guess like for me, over the past year of doing these evals, I think what's surprising to me is, or just not surprising, but like I guess one interesting thing to see in the data is that user expectations are evolving just as quick as the AI models are evolving for a set of users. For users who are coming to our AI products every day, just as the AI models are coming out with new capabilities, frontier models are upgrading their models. For the users who are using them, they notice these changes. You can ask any user, like, oh, I go to Claude for this, I go to ChatGPT for this, I use Copilot for this. They already have in their mind sort of an expectation of what each model can do, and it's through these repeated use of these AI models, and that baseline keeps evolving. So when you have these traditional evals that are already predefined and kind of capturing a specific spec or a specific rubric, that's not evolving with the user. So you need these user evals to continuously have the user in the loop. Just as users are evolving, we need to keep up with their tastes, their preferences, their intents, and all sort of the dynamic situations that they bring to our products.
So for someone here today who maybe is like, I don't see myself running these kinds of evals myself in the near future, what can they still take away as UXRs from like what you've learned from your process or how you approach it? What should they, do you think, learn?
I think that you should really ask yourself if you really can't. There might be situations where it's not right, of course, but I'll say two things to that point. One is, steering a model happens in things as high up the funnel as the system prompt. And we do a lot of testing, a lot of user evals on the system prompt and manipulating it and seeing how things change. And I imagine that a lot of us are touching products where we're not working on a foundational model, that's fine, but we're doing various aspects of post-training. And for sure, the system prompt is the easiest, lightest touch possible. The other thing I'll say is, yes, user evals are particularly valuable at evaluating model quality, but they are also evaluating the full product experience. And so the sample sizes we use are quite large because model outputs are highly variable, let's say, per use case, right? You want to see how a model answers a question about growing my plant optimally like 30, 50 times to know if it's really good. You can't ask it once. But with much smaller samples, you can still get a holistic comparative understanding of the product you have. So if you're touching a product that has any type of AI output, it might still be very valuable for you to understand with some degree of scale at very specific use cases how that model performs relative to a competitor or something else. And you'll extract like fail states and delight states, and you'll then hill climb on those, and you'll do another eval, and you'll see if you changed anything or you made it worse, which happens. So it might not be for everyone, but it's probably for more of you than you might expect.
Yeah, one sort of guidance I would say, So Giuliano works on the frontier models, and I work more like on the layer on top of that. And for all of you, you might not be working on the frontier models or even the system prompt, but you can go back to your organization, your products, and see, what AI-generated output or AI feature do I have here? And how are we measuring the success of this? Are we really focused on the output quality? Or as Giuliano say, are we actually measuring the whole experience? Oftentimes, companies are just focused on the output quality. Is the response accurate? Is the response correct? But what happens after that? And that's where I think UXR can sort of provide that knowledge, that sort of expertise to understand the whole experience of the user. So you can go back to your companies and understand how are you evaluating the whole experience of this specific AI feature in my product, and how can we sort of change the conversation so that we can sort of systematically integrate more of that user feedback into that evaluation.
Yeah, we capture a lot of incidental things about the product that we don't throw away, but maybe are less relevant to my direct stakeholders because I'm focusing on the model. But we catch so much more that has nothing to do with the model using this methodology. So, yeah.
Yep.
Can I get any questions from the audience? I see one here.
Hi. Okay. Thank you for the panel discussion. I was wondering, how do you see going back to, like, let's say we do model evaluations and we have some ideas on how we can improve the models. My question is like more about the agent layer. So the system that is built on the model, sometimes there are too many factors. For example, the system prompt, the like multi-agent communication, tool selection. So I'm wondering, how do you see those cases where we do like those evaluations and then figuring out which of those levers it is that we're supposed to improve for the product experience?
I can take a first stab. Yeah. Okay. Okay. So it depends. In that question, were at least two different ways in which we might want to run this methodology to make something better. One, the first part is if it's about outputs specifically, where there was no tool calling, let's say, tool calling being, it runs off and does a search, or it pulls from some like personal memory RAG architecture to improve the prompt, or some shopping, whatever it is. You're right, there are many levers, and we will iterate and play with them. It might be about changing the annotation guidelines for the folks doing preference annotation of the model training. So that's not an eval, but that's just like A, B, A, B, A, B. This is better, but we'll give it a slight tweak. Or it might be a system prompt change, and that's much more variable, and it's sort of, you're playing a little bit in a nebulous space. But then if it's something more specific, like a specific tool that's being called, let's say you have a product that does some type of a shopping thing, let's say, like I will purposefully bias part of the sample. So I will have like half of the sample be, as ecologically valid as possible, meaning just have natural conversations you typically already have. I've recruited you because I know the use cases you tend to use, so I can kind of distribute my sample with, somewhat accurately in that sense. But maybe I'll take a third of the sample and I'll be like, I want you to shop. I want you to find stilettos for the beach wedding. And in that case, it'll purposely surface a lot more problems in the shopping tool. That maybe in the ecologically valid sample, we'll only get like a 3% prevalence because they'll incidentally stumble upon it. So there's, we're giving you a very high level, but there's so much creativity with the methodology that you can laser in on things, you can make it a little less natural, a little more, and use that to adjust then like your shopping tool, with a really fine-tooth comb.
More questions? One more. Oh, this person right here.
It may be a build on that question of we talked about correctness and system prompts and the model. When you get a response, when you're talking about someone's evaluation or preference, it sounds like correctness is one thing, but the minute you want to go beyond that, it may be a tone, style, it may be the length of the response, so many, like 50, 60, whatever dimensions that are implicit. How do you tease out what is most critical for the job? So it seems like a multi-variable kind of question for multiple jobs. It's this giant matrix of preferences or choices for people to say, I prefer A versus B. How do you dig into it and find out what matters for those jobs so you can correct it or improve the product accordingly?
Yeah, this is a great question. So actually I come from a quantitative UX background. So I've done a lot of survey research, and so when I started working on user evals with my teammates Chris Monnier, Wendy Wang, they were very focused on the qualitative portion of it. So what's missing from this whole methodology is that you don't see all the qualitative work that actually went prior to implementing the user evals. So we've done a lot of one-on-one sessions with interviews for users for a specific intent to really get a good intuition about what's important for them. And through these user evals, you can kind of treat them like a survey, right? So as they're evaluating each response A, response B, you can actually add like survey Likert questions for each of the themes that we identified in qual research, like things that, like if you're editing text, the tone of the text might be super important, or the polish of the text, or how how easily available or easy to act on. Like, can you copy and paste that text easily into something else? Those are really important attributes for specific intents, and you want to include that in your evaluation. Now that we have all these tools available to us, you can do your own drivers analysis. Use Claude, use VS Code, use any sort of the models you have. Do a rudimentary sort of drivers analysis to tease out which of these attributes are most important to the outcome variable, which is the user's preference, right? Or partner with your fellow quant UX researcher. They will be super excited to play with this data, especially if you collect this data at scale. All this rich contextual feedback, the transcripts, the Likert questions, the signal, which is the user preference, and that's driving everything from this. The possibilities are endless in terms of what you can do with that data.
And can I add one quick thing, which is, yeah, like Chuck was saying, we'll add a lot of secondary metrics to the eval, not just preference. You can add things about tone. But I'll also say, like, what an even harder problem is that I have not figured out that is an extension of your question is, if you have something that's funny for one person, it's not for the other. Or if the tone is empathetic for one person, it might not be for the other. And so once you reach a baseline level of good, like this is a good model, the subjective preferences, even within the differences within the population and who you're building for, or do you even care at that point necessarily, because you need to make something as elastic as possible, becomes a really hard problem to figure out. Yeah.
This is a very rich topic. Lots of hard things to figure out, but really enjoyed hearing from both of you all today. Thank you, Chuck. Thanks, Giuliano. Please give it a hand for these two.
Thank you, Jake.
Thank you.